Since this video of Princess Catherine was released, there's already been speculation on TikTok as to whether it's real. That's part of a larger conversation. How can you trust what you see in an image or video? This is nothing new. Visual manipulation has been happening for decades. For example, you might know this Loch Ness Monster photo. It was first published in 1934, then later proved to be fake. There's also been images like this one from 2006. A freelance photographer for Reuters added extra smoke and flares in Photoshop to this image of the Lebanon War. When that was discovered, Reuters stopped working with him. I also spoke to a photography professor whose own image was manipulated without his knowledge. He uploaded it to be used as a paid stock image when John Kerry announced he was running for president in 2004. The photo had been taken more than 3 decades earlier. A graphic designer downloaded it and imposed a 1972 photo of Jane Fonda. That version went viral, but the image is fake.
And I suppose at that time there wasn't really the tools to necessarily say that my photo's been manipulated here.
No, there weren't the tools, and in spite of going on numerous television broadcasts internationally and the New York Times, people saw it, and it's like, I've seen this picture with my own eyes. What do you mean it's not real?
But Light says today's level of distrust in photography is spurred by the availability of more manipulation tools.
Back then was a lot more difficult to do than it is now. Of course, now we have AI. We begin to question what's real, what's not real. How do we know?
To be clear, in Princess Catherine's case, that video was filmed by BBC Studios last week. But all that frenzy was initially sparked by this image from Kensington Palace. It was published by multiple outlets, but later found to be manipulated by the royal family. Which brings me to my next point, handout photos. These are images supplied to the media by a third party. Kensington Palace isn't the first to do this. When you search the Associated Press or Reuters image libraries, there are thousands of images labeled handouts from organizations, military, police, governments, and more. But the journalism professors we spoke to say that news organizations need to look at how they report on and verify handout images. They told us news organizations should be clear on where the image comes from, but also say there's a responsibility on the viewer to better understand what they're looking at.
It's intrinsic to the medium that it can show a truth, but it can never show the whole truth. As we're in a faster image making environment and more new technologies become available, is less to focus on the technologies themselves and more to focus on education, on media literacy.
Just because something comes from a senior politician or an official source doesn't mean it shouldn't be questioned, it shouldn't be followed up. And I think that's certainly the lesson going forward, that we should learn from this situation, that even official sources need to be questioned.
For example, CBC News was one of the many news organizations to initially publish that Kensington Palace photo. It had been picked up by 3 wire services that CBC subscribes to. At the time, it was the first image that the public had seen of the princess since she underwent abdominal surgery, and CBC used it when reporting this. Hours later, photo agencies killed the image when it was found to be digitally altered. CBC replaced it with one that the Prince and Princess of Wales posted on X and explained it had been manipulated. We asked a CBC spokesperson about this, and he told us in an email, the vast majority of images at CBC News are taken by our own journalists or provided by news partners like the Canadian Press and Reuters. He also said there are occasions when we publish images provided by a third party that is not a trusted news partner. However, we always make clear to the audience why the image was used and where it came from. There are also other media organizations that are trying to step up the way they display where images come from. The BBC recently launched a photo verification tool to show the credentials of a photo or video. And that's part of a broader initiative with other media and technology companies to develop standards to certify the source of media. And while these efforts are important, Simon says news organizations should go beyond the image to verify what's happening.
There are more ways than just using grainy footage and grainy images to establish if something is true. You can actually send reporters to the place and try and talk to people. You can go about this in the way that journalists have done for decades. And ultimately, it's a collection of all these different sort of bits of evidence that then hopefully gets us to a situation where we can say, okay, this is true, this has happened, or this is not true, this has not happened. But we shouldn't pin it all onto one single medium.